perfect is the enemy of good.
Mm,
And then it says, be good today. They're not asking them to be perfect.
right.
What I tell designers all the time is this is not a secret. Needs, wants, wishes, not a secret, right? What this is a process. And I'd write up needs, wants, wishes. And I'd say, here's everything you said that you wanted in this project. Let the client put them in the categories. And by the way, the designers end up loving this too. Because,
Guardrails.
well, it's guardrails for them, but again, they hate designing things that don't get built.
Fair enough. Yeah.
If you do this right, upwards of 90% of your designs convert to construction. You control the beginning part, you control the end part. As business owners, we should focus on the things that we're good at and hire people to do the things we're not good at.
The forgiveness that you had brought to light for me for my own well-being has been really great. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey everybody, this is Better Building with Buck. Today I have Jeff Borovitz with Sandler, and I met Jeff at IBS, and he was sharing things about selling and understanding the customer better, which I really appreciated, and the communication part of understanding how to who you're talking to, what's important to them, and actually understanding what they're wanting from you and not trying to sell them. Essentially, you're trying to understand what is actually important to them. And one of the things that, uh, sorry, what I'd like to do actually probably is just introduce Jeff a little bit, understand that he's working with Sandler and um, where you got to and where you're going with this, Jeff.
Sure.
Yeah.
No problem. Hey, first of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
You know, so Sandler's been around for a long time as a selling system. And the reason I like Sandler so much is that it's the only selling process out there that is based entirely on human psychology, and not based on trying to convince anyone of anything. Matter of fact, one of the things that we tout is that it is as a salesperson, it is not your job to convince anyone of anything. It's your job to find out what they need, want, and wish for, and how much money they have, and see what you can fulfill within their budget and if there's a project there or not. There may be, there may not be. What I've done is I've taken this traditional Sandler system and I've customized it for contracting. And really Sandler is about communication between two human beings. And so we work certainly with the sales side, but we do a ton of work with designers. Because if I like to say that I've done 36 design build projects, my wife and I have, in the houses we've lived in and in the rental properties that we own. And I can tell you the names of maybe a handful of the salespeople, but I can tell you the name of every single designer. And so what really happens in design is where most of what we would consider sales, although it's not, designers don't like to call it that, but it's most of where the sales actually occurs. And that's because the trust that designers build is so deep.
Yeah,
And
and
then
they I think they get a lot more like digging in and their total job is to like understand who you are. And if they're not doing that, they're not doing a very good job.
yeah, completely agree. And as a result, we tend to trust the designers and remember them more than the sales guy who comes in at the beginning and then in the middle and then at the end and asks me for a referral. And if they're any good, right? And so I, always have a close relationship with the designers, and I remember all the production folks, and it's really important to know that the communication process has to happen certainly on the sales side, certainly on the design side, but even more so on the production side. Those communications are so important in understanding how people treat other people. I remember we did a kitchen remodel in the house we're in right now, uh, about I'm gonna say 10 years ago, My son, I think, was 12 at the time, and the way our house was laid out, he was losing the room, access to the room where his most valued possession was, which was his Xbox. Right? And the production lead on the project, he had a son about my son's age. And so he figured out that my son's Xbox was in there. And he talked to my son. He said, "Listen, man," he said, "we're going to sweep this broom clean every day at the end when we're done." And he said, "I want you to promise me you'll never walk through here without shoes on." And my son made that promise. And then he cut a zipper in to the tar into the plastic sheeting and taught my son how to use it.
Right,
And said, as soon as you go in, zip it behind you. So too much dust doesn't get in. And then when you leave, unzip it, and then
right,
zip it back up when you're out. And he said, as long as that thing's always zipped, he said, I will give you access every night to your Xbox.
right.
Right. And I will tell you that that simple little act that that production guy did made a huge difference for my entire family because now my son is not as mopey. He's not as difficult to deal with. He's happy. Right. And we remembered it. We remembered it because we did two more projects with that company.
Nice. Yeah, and that was it, like you say, it's a small little like part of what was maybe the experience that you guys have had, but it made such a big impact on your son that in total it was like the overall value that you guys got out of that was extreme.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
huge, right? And I tell people all the time, if you do something for an adult, they go, "Oh, thanks." You do something for their kid, and it's like, wow, right?
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And when we were first when before we got on here, we were talking a little bit about wants, needs, and wishes.
Yeah,
And I'd like to understand why and the untangling of those three words and how much value you think that has to try and get somebody to understand those prior to going into a project so that the captain of the ship, the builder or the designer can actually guide you down a path that you are going to get success by laying out the course of this because most projects they take a long time. You're going to be in design for 6 months. You're going to be building for a year, maybe or
right.
more, and that path is constantly wandering.
Yeah, it's important to understand that designers love to design, and sometimes that can be everybody's worst enemy. And other times it's our best friend, right? And so I think that, the one thing designers hate is spending all this time on a design that doesn't get built.
Right,
They love for their stuff to get built. And so it's essential that designers understand that clients have things they need. And I'll define needs as without this, there is no project. It's the absolute essential part that if we can't have this, we're just not going to spend any money whatsoever. And that is a relatively small part of the project. Then there are things that the clients want, and these are things that I want to have. I'm willing to, and it's important. This part's important. I'm willing to spend some money on to get, right? And so they don't have to be in the project, but I want them to be in the project, and I'm willing to spend money on them. Then there's the wishes. And wishes are things that I wish I could have as part of the project, but I'm not necessarily willing to spend more money on them, right? And so it's what we find happens a lot is somebody signs a project, they have a budget of $500,000 to do a first floor remodel, right? And it gets into design, it comes out of design at 750,000. And almost every time and that's not a problem, by the way, unless the client didn't agree during the design process to increase the budget to 750,000. Oftentimes I find that little tidbit of information gets skipped in design.
right.
And so But if designers can understand what are the needs, what are the wants, and what are the wishes, and the designers who do that generally see the design project go up during design, but with the client's blessing.
Right.
So that when you get to the end, there's no surprise on the budget, right? And how does it change the project if at the end when you're presenting a final design to go to construction, you could say, yeah, during the process we said it was going to we thought, with the things you needed, the things you wanted that we were able to fit in, a couple of the wishes, we had both agreed that this was going to come in somewhere around $750,000. Well, I've got great news. We're actually in at 742.
Right.
How now the client thinks you're a rock star because you're $8,000 under,
Right.
right? Versus if you said 750 and you come in at 775, they think you are trying to screw them,
Right.
right? And and so having these discussions as you go through, and what I tell designers all the time is, don't this is not a secret. Needs, wants, wishes, not a secret, right? What this is a process. I would take everybody into a board with a room with a whiteboard, and I'd write up needs, wants, wishes, and I'd say, here's everything you said that you wanted in this project. Go ahead and categorize for them, or for them, categorize them for me, right?
Right.
And tell me what without these things, there's no project. Here's the wants, things we're willing to pay, we'd like that we want to have that we're willing to pay extra for. Here's the things that would be great to have. We're not necessarily willing to pay a whole bunch of extra money for. Let the client put them in the categories.
Right.
Think how much easier your life becomes. The client's telling you these are the needs. Now, if the budget's $250,000 on a kitchen design or 150,000, whatever it might be, if the needs are already at that number, you can just be honest with them. We're already going to be at the number. Probably can't include these wants and wishes.
Right. Yeah. It's a it's a it it makes a lot of sense. And I like the idea too of the interactive approach to that
Yeah,
because it's not you sticking stickers
right.
and so it's kind of also making the process of what is kind of a complex process building a project a little bit more simpler in laying out these strategic steps towards their goals.
Yeah, I think that by making it interactive, it's giving the client the illusion of control
Mm,
without, while you still are maintaining control,
right.
right? And I think that's an important part. Certainly is more collaborative.
Yeah.
And the more collaborative you get, and think about the conversations it enables you to have. If our budget's 150 and your wants or your needs are going to be at really close to that 150 range, I could say to you, hey, listen, not sure what we should do here. Just for me to give you the things you've put here in the needs is pretty much going to run us to the budget
Right.
that you've given us. If so, it gives us a chance to have the conversation of do if we want to include some of these wants, where would we find more money?
Yeah.
Right.
That's
And now the client, it's their decision.
yeah. No, that's fair. And and everything's kind of a little bit more outlined. And I really like that approach with that.
And by the way, the designers end up loving this too, because
Guardrails.
well, it's guardrails for them, but again, they hate designing things that don't get built.
Fair enough. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
helps them design things that are going to get built, and it helps them to have a more easily ready discussion around scope and budget that they wouldn't or normally get. And the client, if the client, by the way, as we go through this, if the client says, well, we want to include these five things, how much is this going to cost? I get the designers don't know. However, any good designer knows the difference between a $150,000 kitchen and a $200,000 kitchen. They may not know exactly how much these things are going to cost, but they know the difference between those two things, right? And if they
Hmm.
don't, they desperately need to.
Yeah. No,
But
that's fair.
the good designers I've worked with know the difference. Hey, listen, it could cost up to 200,000. I'm not saying it's going to, right? But if the client agrees to that, then you put it in writing. Hey, you've asked us to include these extra things, which we've talked about could increase the budget by up to $50,000, which makes the overall budget up to 200,000. Just have them sign off on that.
You're right.
Doesn't cost them anything today, but now when you go to present, there's no surprise because they've
Y-
already said that they're willing to do that,
Yeah, fair
right?
enough.
And 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 if they don't want to do that and it stops them, that's a win because the designer doesn't have to spend time designing something in that they're just going to have to take out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely a common occurrence is, it goes away to this design uh Wizard of Oz world and comes back and the big bad news bear of the builder has to say, "Hey, we're just not quite there."
You know,
And and oh, go ahead.
my view on this is that if you do this right, upwards of 90% of your designs convert to construction,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm it. I had a guy call me a couple months ago, and he told me that, hey, I think I need to get some sales training for my sales team. And I said, well, what makes you think you need sales training? And he says to me, well, we're signing lots of design agreements, but they're not converting. And I'm going, ding, 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 ding. You don't have a sales problem. You're signing design agreements, they're not converting. And as we started talking, he had a design problem. Things were going in design at 150,000 and coming in at 300,000, 250,000, right? You're over designing. His win rate conversion was in the 40s,
Right.
right? So think about this. How discouraging is it for the sales team when they're signing design agreements and they're not converting?
Right.
And by the way, for a design build firm, you're going to slowly go broke if your conversion rate's in the 40s.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah, you, you- you're not usually making a lot of money off the design.
Right.
It's the actual construction work that you're progressing your company towards that forward march of success.
Yeah. So it's huge, right? It needs, wants, wishes, and doing that exercise in design is great. The salesperson could use that same language to get the design agreement signed.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. One of the other things that I noticed that I saw on one of your socials is you talked a little bit about what could you have done differently? And I was just kind of wanted to understand and unpack that a little bit about how often in a day you're kind of reflecting on what could I have done differently? And is that to a small level of daily task, or is this more on like larger decision making things that you should be reflecting? Because it's a reflection question, isn't it?
It is, and what I look at it is definitely a lagging indicator, right? It's something that we're looking in the rearview mirror and we're seeing what's behind us.
Right.
But I think that if we don't learn from the things we could have done better that we have control of, there's some things that we don't control, right? We were talking about you and I was talking earlier with somebody today about everything that's going on with the U.S. and Canada right now, and you know, the truth of the matter is we can't control that,
Right.
right? It's what's going to happen is what's going to happen. That's outside of anybody's control except for a couple a couple people way above my pay grade,
Yeah, fair
right?
enough. I hear you.
But we still control over we still control over we still have control over our attitudes, the behaviors that we do, and the techniques that we use. to deal with those things, right?
Right.
And so we have control over those things. And so anything, I think when we lose a sale in remodeling and contracting, when we lose a sale, it should we should always be doing a postmortem about why.
Right.
And I would argue at the end of every project there should be a postmortem, right?
Yeah. That's fair.
That says, hey, by all means, what did we do well? Let's celebrate those things, right? And let's make sure we keep doing them.
Get some smiles on some faces in the room.
Yeah, right. And recognize people that did a great job. It's important. But even more important is realizing where did we fall down?
Right.
What could we have done better? Right? Sometimes it's communication. Sometimes it's we got, my grandmother used to, when I would screw something up, my grandmother used to say, well, you got your fingerprints all over that one, didn't you? And I think that we have projects like that, don't we?
Yeah, for sure we do. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. You sometimes you're getting in the way yourself trying to get things organized and yeah.
and sometimes it's little things. I mean, I'll go back to when we did our kitchen project at our house, right? And we were living there while the kitchen project was going on. And the builder told us they would create a temporary kitchen for us.
Right.
And that sounds great, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. It could be depends on how far that temporary kitchen goes.
Well, that's exactly the problem. They said temporary kitchen. They meant they would roll the refrigerator over to this other area and they give us a table where we could set up, and they gave us a portable microwave
Right.
and a toaster, right? When my wife heard temporary kitchen, she heard hot and cold running water, right? A sink, right? That
Yeah.
she could wash things in, and maybe at least a toaster oven,
Right.
right? And and so they
Uh,
ended up caught, and actually that little bit of miscommunication actually ended up causing a bit of friction between us and the contractor,
right.
right? Now, overall, we had a great experience. We used them a couple more times for other
Yeah.
projects at the house, and they were great, and we still have a good relationship with them. But that little bit of thing, and I gave them that feedback at the end.
Right.
And it's funny because he's told me now when they talk about temporary kitchen, they define what that means.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
and
Well,
it's
it's up for interpretation, like you say. It's
right. And so that little bit of what could I have done differently for him has made a huge difference in how he communicates going forward.
right.
And I think that it's really important that contractors understand what they control and what they don't, right? You control you control that in that lead intake process. When the client reaches out, that first conversation, you have control over that as a contractor. You control when your salesperson goes out and talks to them. You control the design process. You control signing the construction agreement. Where you lose control is on demo day. Because stuff happens, right? We'll keep it G-rated.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
Stuff happens. Once you start building, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Some of which is beyond your control,
That is
right?
fair.
And so, and then you lose control through that building process, right? And then at the end, you control the ending process.
Right.
And so, how do you get better at the parts you can control? And what we know, I'm a big fan of the Walt Disney Corporation, and I've done some classes with them, and they are fanatical about studying things. And what they found is that 80% of somebody's experience with you is about how it starts and how it ends. The middle part, people forgive and forget,
Interesting.
but they remember how it starts and how it ends.
Huh.
And so if we're really good at the start, right? I mean, I will
Yeah.
tell you, that builder we did the kitchen with,
Yeah.
my son was 12, my daughter was 8. On demo day, when the kids were getting ready to leave for school,
Yeah.
he let them swing hammers at the walls.
Oh, that must have been a great experience for them.
They thought that was fantastic, right?
Uh,
Controlling the experience,
right, right.
right? My
Yeah.
kids still remember. It's been, let's see, my son was 12, he's 22 now.
Yeah.
Still remembers doing that.
Right.
They remember that the production manager the day before demo told them, "Hey, guys, tonight these two walls are going away completely. Feel free to draw on them, do anything you want to them." And the
Uh,
kids did. They spent the night drawing on the walls, right? With permanent markers. It was
uh,
fun,
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
right? And the
That
next
makes
day they got to hammer some out.
yeah.
And but that's part of controlling the process.
Right.
It's 10 years later, my kids remember that, right? Once they got walls open and they found out that maybe that wasn't built as well as it should have been, right?
That happens.
And it did happen for us. We had to end
Yeah.
up having to put a graded beam in, right? That was totally outside of anybody's knowledge when we started.
Yeah.
Um, and so they can't control that part of the process, right? It happens. It was needed. We had to do it. Didn't have a choice, right? And I wasn't happy about it. My wife wasn't happy about it. Honestly, the contractor wasn't all that happy about it either,
Right. Yeah. It's
right?
delay in the schedule.
Yeah. And so, and then they control the offboarding process at the end, right? Um, and they did a great job with the punch list at the end, and they gave me and my wife and my kids blue rolls of blue tape. Go ahead, anything that you think needs to be fixed, mark it, right? And they had their blue tape team come through the next day. That's what they called them, the blue tape team, come through the next day and fix everything,
Right.
right? And and they were smart because they knew that we had to go grocery shopping, right? And so what they did was they asked my wife, "Hey, what are the list of the staples you're going to go buy?" And she gave them that list. When we came back and they were turning the keys over to us the next day, guess what was in every cabinet and cupboard? All the staples she gave them.
Oh, that's amazing.
It came up to like maybe $250,
Right.
right? On a hundred at the time, 10 years ago was a
Yeah.
$185,000 project.
Right.
It's nothing.
Yeah. No, no. For the satisfaction that and reward and joy that it must have brought your wife and you and
It was huge. And they gave us a gift card to go buy the non-staple stuff at Safeway, right? And so cost them maybe $500 total, right? For the goodwill it bought them, it was probably the best money they spent
yeah.
because it made us forget about all those things that happened in the middle,
Right.
right? The time where the graded beam, when there was a delay on something else, right? Um,
The
they ding,
inevitables of construction.
they dinged up one of the cabinets,
Right.
right? One of the custom cabinets. They dinged it up, and we had to wait for to get refinished, right? All of that stuff gets forgotten because of what they do at the end, right? And so you control the beginning part, you control the end part. Make sure you're good at controlling the things you control, and always go back and look at those and say, what could we have done better?
Mm. You've gave me some reflection.
Cool.
Yeah, I like that. Well, it's when I think about that reflecting, I was thinking about it in the way that when you care a lot, how much stuff you bring home that you like dwell on the like,
Mhm.
how did I not know? How did I should have known, I could have done at this and when you say that in a way that it's like you truly do. This it is now that you've like laid it out the way you do, it's like the beginning is definitely all the things. Because as soon as you start getting in, like if it's a new build, you dig the hole, you don't know, you don't have X-ray vision.
No.
and that can change the whole thing moving forward. And I really appreciate you sharing that with me because I think that was will really help with my um, mental game of understanding, like, hey, be a little easier on yourself sometimes because there is some parts that you just can't sort out.
Well, but yeah, there's some stuff that is out of our control, but what we still control is when those things happen, we still control our attitude. We still control the behaviors that we have to do, and we still control the techniques that we're going to use to do those things,
Yeah.
right? And you know, I always tell people, especially when I train the production crews, I always tell about communication. I always tell them, have empathy. You know more, you are an expert at this, and you know more about it than the homeowner does. And don't talk to them about, uh, you know, um, oh God, I can't remember what it was now. Um,
That's okay.
we were converting the garage into a teen room at one point,
Okay.
and oh, the guy says, so what we need to do is put some LVL beams in here. I have no idea what an LVL beam is.
Right.
I mean,
The construction lingo.
right, that jargon, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I have the advantage of I train construction people every day.
Right.
So the next day I came to class and I said, hey, before we get started, I have to ask y'all, what is this? And they explained to me what it was. And I'm like,
Is this
oh,
going
all
to be
right.
expensive? It
Well,
sounded expensive.
yeah, and it was expensive, right? And then the folks in my class said, yeah, no, he's right. That's what you need. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But the minute you start doing that, you make people uncomfortable.
Mm,
And when they're uncomfortable, their trust level in you goes down.
right.
When you talk to them how they can understand it, right? I tell people all the time, don't talk way up here. Talk way down here, right? And not down to somebody, but I try to you've been on my Instagram channel. I try to make the stuff on Instagram so that my 9-year-old niece can understand it
Right.
and my 80-year-old mother can understand it,
Yeah.
right?
That's
If
fair.
if those two things happen, everybody in between will understand.
Yeah. No, that's a very yeah.
And now people feel comfortable and their trust levels, their ability to trust goes up, right? Have empathy, not sympathy, right? Sympathizing is when you feel the emotion, the frustration and anger and everything else that the client may feel at times. When you're
Mm,
feeling it with them, that's sympathy.
right.
Empathy is understanding the feelings without experiencing them yourself.
Mm.
Right? That's Jeff's definition of empathy. I'm sure
No,
somebody
that
listening to this is
no,
going to go
but
to Webster and look it up and say that's not how it is, but that's my definition.
well, but that's the thing about words is that it's so funny because the reason why I wanted you to define needs, wants, and wishes is because the everybody could has and could believe that, those words could be interchangeable in their desires of what they believe to be true in their, like, good, great, things like that. It's like, okay, well, what do you feel true to you as being the greater, or the thing that is stronger than the next?
I was down in Arizona over the weekend with my son visiting him, and we go to spring training every year, and this was our spring training weekend, and and so we were walking through the Cubs facility at training facility, and on the wall there is a saying uh, as they walk out to the field, and it says, "Perfect is the enemy of good."
Mm,
And then it says, be good today. They're not asking them to be perfect.
right. Yeah, yeah. Take some of that edge off you. Go out
Yeah,
there and have some fun maybe and
yeah.
play the game that doesn't have to be so restrictive, and you'll probably do a lot better job.
But I find that happens with contractors too, whether it's new build or design. Sometimes we get in there and we're trying to be perfect, right? When in reality, people just need us to be good,
Right.
you know? People really just want us to be good. And so if we can be good, it's usually not a problem.
Right. You know what? I will share with you, Jeff, you've done a lot just in what we've been talking about so far on my mental capacity on how I can approach things. So I've appreciated that a lot. So
Oh, thank
thank
you. I
you.
appreciate that.
Yeah, because it, and you probably run into it all the time with, that's why you brought this up because you must have heard builders and feeling this this anxiety that they build up in themselves. I believe a lot to do with it is the fact that most uh, builders or a fair amount of the builders were once technicians
Hmm.
and they did the thing, carpenter, whatever the trade was. Then they started a business. So then they had to put on a different hat or multiple hats or whatever. And lots of them or like the ADD or the like, unperformer at school. So you walk around with this like uh ability to feel like the inadequacy. And so when you get to this place where you're in control of so many things, you're then feeling like, well, I've got to be doing this better. This You got to do
Well,
this perfect.
you know what's so funny about that is I read an article last year in Forbes magazine, and they were talking about the fact that many of the most successful business owners, and I'm not talking about Fortune 1000, I'm just talking about small businesses,
Right,
right? Small and medium-sized businesses, what most of the contractors are, right? That most of the people who run those businesses were not great students.
right,
Many of them, matter of fact, they said I can't remember if it was somewhere around 50% of them had some level of ADD,
right.
right? Or ADHD or whatever
Yeah,
acronym, right?
some sort of ability to not be able to be productive in a classroom setting.
Yeah, and it's so funny because we put a lot of emphasis on for kids on grades, right?
Hmm.
And listen, it's a measurement tool, I get it, right? But there is no correlation between somebody's grade at something and their ability to go out and do it in the real world,
Yeah.
right? And so the amount of builders that I talk with that have some feeling of imposter syndrome, right?
Hmm.
Where they feel like it's not real, they don't deserve it. It's just, I mean, it quite honestly would stun a team of oxen in its tracks, right? And, but they do deserve it, right? They really do because we've taught people that I'm not a good student. All these negative self-talk things,
Hmm.
right? That drive home this feeling, right? And in reality, I I I I struggled in high school in math. I mean, struggled. I'm still convinced that my my 10th grade teacher only passed me in geometry because she didn't want me in the classroom again. Uh, right? I don't know how I went from like a 42% to a C minus. I have no idea. Okay.
Just don't come back.
Yeah,
That will be great, Jeff.
I think
Thank
that
you.
was Mrs. Nichols' thing was I just don't want you back here next year. And
Oh, that's good. I like that. Thank you for sharing that.
but it had no correlation to my ability to do my job,
Right,
right? It didn't, right? And in the end, what I really found out is that I can pay attention to details if it's something I'm interested in,
right.
right? My wife doesn't understand how I can know I can know every baseball statistic, but can't remember to check to see if the laundry needs to move from the washer to the dryer.
Yeah,
Or,
I hear ya. I get the same grief. Maybe
or
not
where I
about
put my phone.
baseball specifically, but yeah.
Yeah, or where I put my phone. She says you can remember all these phone numbers in your head, but you can't remember where you put your phone. And I tell her it's two separate things. They're not the same. And, and,
Oh, that's
and,
awesome.
and, and so I think you just have to be good at the you as business owners, we should focus on the things that we're good at and hire people to do the things we're not good at.
Yeah, that's fair. I can appreciate that. Well, I might cut her off here, Jeff. I've been so excited that we were able to do this, and like I hope that we can do this again in the future.
Absolutely.
Um, I'll try and what's the best way for people to get in contact you? How would you like them to understand what you're
Well,
sharing, what you're
two
doing?
things. They can go on Instagram
Yeah,
and it's Selling with Jeff. Is Selling with Jeff is my Instagram handle. So if you go there, you'll see we post like 15 sales tips a week
yeah,
on Instagram, which is really cool.
yeah. It is
And
super
it's
awesome.
absolutely free. And no paid content on there whatsoever. Um, or if they want to learn more, talk with us about how we might be able to help them with either their sales team, their design team, their production team, they can email me at sellingwithjeff@sandler.com.
Perfect. Well, Jeff, I am so excited that we were able to share this. I hope that my mental uh, game gets stronger because of this, and I think it will because I the forgiveness that you had brought to light for me for my own well-being has been really great. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.